Okay. I guess we might as well get started. Welcome. Thank you for sticking around after lunch and coming to our session. My name is Arthur Poole. I'm a staff member at the system office. I'm in the Office of Academic and Student Affairs. One of my roles is also to serve as the state contact person for the multi-state collaborative. And my colleagues who would do the bulk of the presentation are institutional contact people for the multi-state collaborative at their institutions. And they're the ones who do the heavy lifting. Yvonne, Michael, and Ron will join me in this presentation. Additionally, Marsha is also an institutional contact person. And Joe, whose last name I can't pronounce, is joining us from Three Rivers as their institutional contact person. The Multi-State Collaborative is an initiative designed to provide meaningful evidence about how well students are achieving important learning outcomes. And the value rubrics developed by AAC and U is the tool that's used to measure those learning outcomes. The first stage of the initiative took place in 14-15, and it was called the pilot year, pilot stage. This year it's called the demonstration year, the 15-16 year. The pilot study was very process-oriented, and in implementing that process, we were sort of forced into becoming a statewide collaborative, the system office and the 7 participating CSCU institutions. More importantly, what we found was the activities on campus involving the faculty were also very collaborative activities. And that's where we saw the greatest value in this project. We have a description of our participation in your package. The pocket on the left, and the third paragraph is basically the focus of this particular session. The pilot study was deemed to be a success. The results, we can't generalize from the results, but we can conclude that reliable evidence can be obtained by using this value rubric in assessing student learning outcomes. The second item in your pocket is the system office received aggregated data on the results of the scoring of these rubrics for our universities and for our 2-year institutions. And you have histograms on either side of this handout that shows the results. We have some students doing poorly, but we have more students doing very well in this particular outcome. And this one is on quantitative literacy. But what I want to point out to you is that most of our students, of course, score in the middle. And the performances of CSCU students are basically typical of what happened across the country. We're basically, excuse me, sir.
Sorry to be late.
We're comparable to the rest of the country in this regard. The participating institutions receive data files on the uploading process and the various various outcomes of the process. And my colleagues will talk about, well, during their presentation, they'll present information about how they utilize that data. What we want to do is to leave about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. And my colleagues will now come forward. in this order. First, we have Dr. Michael Benedy. He's the Director of Assessment at Southern Connecticut State University. Following him would be Yvonne Kirby, who's the Director of Institutional Research and Assessment at Central Connecticut State University, and Dr. Ronald Picard, who recently became the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at Naugatuck Valley Community College. Okay, Michael?
Good afternoon. If you would please take out from your packets NEASC Standard 8. I'd like to place the multi-state collaborative within the framework of responding to changing standards in NEASC. We are currently in the process of writing our NEASC self-study with the new standards. And it really compelled us to think in a different way about our programs and the type of information we collect, what's worth measuring, what's valuable.
You're going to need this if you're going to not get behind it there.
I'm tagged. Does anyone see I'm tagged?
You can't go far now.
I can't go far. What happens if I walk too far away?
It shocks you.
Let me give you, for example, how I sort of started to think about it. Once upon a time, it was enough to count the number of books in the library. Now, we are offering library instruction to students, and we're evaluating the impact. We're looking at both how the students respond and whether the faculty members rated these library instruction sessions. And so it's a different way of thinking. Once it was enough to say, look at all the different campus organizations that we have, and look how many students attend them. If you look on your sheet, 8.4, the institution with stated goals for students' co-curricular learning systematically assess their achievement. Once it was enough to have course evaluations that student complete at the end of the courses, and we say, okay, yes, this is how we demonstrate academic quality. We also, as part of our academic program review, we develop processes for evaluating the different programs. But Gen Ed as a whole, but that's what we're being asked to do here. And it's making, and also I just want to point out, 8.2, the last sentence, the general expectations of the larger academic community. Clear public statements about what students are expected to gain from their education, academically and appropriate to the institution's mission, along with other dimensions. It's really a different way of looking at it. We've never evaluated Gen Ed in its entirety. And I want to mention with this is that all sorts of metrics are being proposed on how to judge our success at these endeavors. Many of these measures are outside of our control. Do we really want to be judged on alumni default on student loans? Is that what we want to be judged on? Do we want to be judged on other metrics such as how many students started, how many students are in each different box? Well, we have students coming from here, students going from there. We could talk about how many degrees we offer, but just knowing the number of degrees that are offered tells us nothing about whether students actually learned anything. All we know is they completed a degree. And so any metric, all the ones that are being proposed that are disconnected from teaching and learning raises, I think, a lot of concern. What I see in the multi-state collaborative is an innovative assessment strategy that is directly linked to teaching and learning. We collect the final papers of seniors, which they wrote in their courses, is completely course-based. The faculty members align their final assignment with ACNU's rubrics, and we're looking at actual papers, and that is indeed under our control. And we're using this project to take a look at Gen Ed as a whole in its entirety on competencies that employers desire in new hires. And I think we would all agree issues such as written communication, critical thinking, and quantitative literacy or quantitative reasoning are desired competencies. And that's where NEASC is moving, is not what we offer, but how well are we promoting our students' competencies in such areas. And so I think that I just wanted to put that frame that the Multi-State Collaborative is really helping us as we write our assessment report, or keep in mind it's now an essay. I shouldn't say assessment report. It's a 15 to 20 page essay that is helping us to think through how we frame the essay. I just want to mention passing as I turn it over to my colleague that one of the nice things about the Multi-State Collaborative is that our students' papers at Southern were scored by faculty in other states. And when we got the papers back, I took the ones that received perfect scores of 4.0 and I circulated it throughout campus. And I think it was very interesting discussions. It was very interesting to see the discussions that occurred because people saw what exemplary papers look like, at least in the eyes of other faculty members in other states. And I think that was just a wonderful launching pad for talking about these issues of what we hope to accomplish for the students. Thank you.
So let me go to the Central Connecticut State, as Michael's right. Yes, requirements did do into what we did with the multi-state.
I get to crown you.
Oh, thank you. In your packet, I've given you a copy. This is a report, similar report to what I gave to our faculty senate a couple weeks ago. I did put in a little bit more information, make it a little bit more generic. But basically, what Michael said and what Arthur has said, is, this was an initiative that we looked at and said this can really help us with our NEAS, either 5th year or 10-year report. The students, in order to participate, have to have 75% of their credits earned for acceptance or for to contribute a paper or whatever the artifact will be. So for a community college, that'll be 45 hours or more, and for a 4-year institution, it's 75 hours or more. So just know that this is both a community college initiative and a 4-year initiative. Michael and Arthur have already talked about the value rubrics, but briefly, the criteria that we had to meet was trying to attract 10 faculty that had enough students in a class where they had an artifact that already existed, so an assignment that already existed that aligned with one of those 3 rubrics. So either critical thinking, written communication, or quantitative reasoning. The goal was to already use something that was created, not to recreate the wheel, ask faculty to do additional information. And so on my campus, what we did is we had workshops where faculty would trade assignments and then agree to critique each other's assignment and say your assignment already aligns well with this rubric, or it doesn't, but if you just make this small change, it doesn't change the content of your assignment, but it does make the instructions a little bit more clear. And so that was really the goal, was not to create additional work for the faculty, but to use something that was already embedded in your course and that the students had a vested interest in completing and doing well. And so those were 2 very attractive pieces to this project. So documentation provided by faculty was minimal. All they had to do was complete a cover sheet, which is essentially a checklist, give us the assignments for my campus. I took them in any form, email, Blackboard, photocopy, however you wanted to. One faculty member used a Dropbox. So I took the assignments in any form, and then I de-identified them. So I stripped the course, the faculty, the student name, any reference to Connecticut, because as Michael said, the multi-state collaborative artifacts were going off campus to a pool that would then be assessed by non-Connecticut faculty, so faculty from 8 other states. And so then we got the information back. And so on that second page, what I want to show you is that my campus went a little bit further than just the multi-state, because our gen ed has been up in the air as to how we're going to assess it. We had an initiative to reform it that failed at Faculty Senate. So I said, to the participating faculty, please give me all of your assignments, regardless of student level. And then with the plan of holding assessment retreats later in the year. And so that first table shows you how many institutions from Connecticut participated. That there were 7 institutions. You can see how many artifacts and how many courses those artifacts were obtained from for each learning outcome. And the initiative in total collected almost 8,700 artifacts. And so I think that's actually a pretty good pilot year. And then on the third page, you can see the CCSU specific results. And you can see where we actually collected 533 artifacts for our own internal use. And we had 27 faculty that participated. They represented 18 different academic departments, which is almost 45% of our academic departments. We had students representing 75% of our undergraduate majors, so we have a very nice cross-discipline representation. And then in Table 3, you can see where we've got the Connecticut multi-state scores, and these are the scores that were derived from the faculty outside of Connecticut, so assessing artifacts from CCSU, from Western and Eastern and Southern. These are the 4-year institutions. I did not show the 2-year institution scores. And then you can see what CCSU's multi-state faculty scores were. So we're very similar to the state, maybe a little bit higher in quantitative reasoning. In Table 4 is where I started and held our first assessment retreat, and that was in June 2015. We did a norming session similar to what AAC and you did for scoring the multi-state faculty or multi-state artifacts. So for this assessment retreat, what we did was we focused on those artifacts that we submitted to the multi-state. So it's not all, so these are just the seniors, no freshmen, sophomores, or juniors in it. And at the end of the day, our faculty scored within 1 point of the multi-state faculty, 85% of the time. That's really good. So felt very comfortable that our norming session was solid and that we had repeatable results. So 2 different sets of faculty came up with similar scores. So that's good. And then Figure 1 is just a different way to look at that information. And you can see that this is where I took the average scores from the multi-state versus the CCSU faculty, and the differences are very small. So those 2 different ways to look at that information, and feel very comfortable that we're at least doing something similar that's repeatable. And then Figure 2, which is on page 6, is where you see our specific results. So these are the results from CCSU faculty only. These artifacts are, we scored actually more artifacts than the multi-state faculty. So the multi-state faculty scores are not in this, in Figure 2. So I think we have usable data. I think we can go in and we can say, okay, look at, in critical thinking, the use of evidence. We have too many students scoring 1 and 2. We need to move them to 3s and 4s. I think that's enough information for faculty to go and say, okay, so I need to help students figure out how to incorporate evidence. And then on the last page, some considerations. Really the preliminary benefits that my campus saw are consistent criteria for each undergraduate competency. You've got consistent performance thresholds for students, so you're no longer looking and saying, okay, for written communication, we've got a rubric that English is using, a rubric that communication is using, and a different rubric that journalism is using. We now have a common rubric. We have something that's applicable university-wide. So I think that was very important. I think we've got usable data. I think it's scalable. I think we can begin adding additional rubrics to this. And how we do assessment at CCSU is that each department was responsible for their contribution to Gen Ed. And what this does is it removes the burden from each department, and and puts it on the faculty who are actually participating in the assessment retreats. And so it does remove the burden, but I think overall, the burden has been reduced for the faculty. So it shifts it from the individual departments where, 2 or 3 or 4 people are doing it in each department to, under 20 faculty doing it for the campus. And so, so I think that was a minimal time commitment on their part. And so that's how we use the information. We've had approval from our faculty senate to move forward and do this for a few more years. So, Ron?
And your airing, that's right. Okay. The first thing that you could look at is these are the scores from Naugatuck Valley Community College. And one of the first things that we noticed is that if you compare them to the state level scores from Connecticut, the quantitative Arthur gave you, but I have another copy of the same one. These are the 2 years. And then I have the written on the back. Okay, our scores match up pretty well with the state scores, and also, as Michael pointed out, the state scores match up very well with the national scores. So it's not we're not really far off in terms of the performance of the frequency performance of our students. So looking at these scores, I felt, okay, we're sort of within the national average. I mean, we are still, more along the lines of the 2s than the 3s. But one of the things my faculty really liked to see, it's probably not statistically significant, but they were excited to see that on average, the 2-year schools in quantitative literacy outperformed the 4-year schools. Barely outperformed. But the way I explain it is that there are many majors that once the students complete their gen ed math requirements, never see math again. And the 4-year schools the students had to have 90 credits to qualify, whereas at the 4-year schools, the 2-year schools, we had to have 45 credits to qualify. And so our students were still in the midst of their gen ed requirements, and so we had just finished taking math courses, whereas many of the students at the 4-year level, they hadn't taken math in probably a year or so. And so that may account for the slight difference there. Though it could just be a statistical anomaly, like I said, because I'm not sure if it was statistically significant. But it was good to just tell my faculty so that they could be happy about themselves. So anyway, so that's one way. The other thing that I did is I took the value rubric. So if you take out this piece of paper, it has the written communication value rubric on one side, and that has the quantitative value rubric on the other side. A few years ago, when TAP was passed, I convinced my faculty to adopt the TAP Gen Ed framework for our Gen Ed requirements. And this was not an easy task to do, particularly for terminal degree programs, okay, who had a 24 credit Gen Ed, and now suddenly they had a 31 or 30, 31, 32 credit Gen Ed, and they were not too happy about that. But what I saw the multi-state collaborative as a possibility to do was to map the value rubric onto the TAP rubrics that were created. So if you see the quantitative reasoning, where it says A, B, and then on the back it says C and D, the value rubric for quantitative literacy, that matches up to the A, B, C, and D on that one. I mean, the value rubric has one extra category that the TAP does not have. But what you could see is that the TAP rubrics that were created by the subcommittees way back in 2012, I believe, right, Lauren? 2012? That was a long time ago. That committee, without, I don't think necessarily having access to the value rubrics, created a rubric that was very, very similar. Okay, Very similar. And the same thing's true for the written communication. That's another one that I provided you with. That's the one that's stapled because English faculty wrote it and they're very verbose. So they went on for pages upon pages. I can say that because I used to be English faculty. Anyway, so again, I matched up A, B, C, and D with the items on the and then there's an E on the multi-state, and actually the TAP is asking for a little bit more than what the value rubrics are asking for. And so I matched it up. Now that serves several purposes. That was one, to tell my faculty that by adopting the TAP, we were adopting what's considered national best practices. Okay? Because these rubrics are very similar to the AAC and U rubrics, which are being used all over the place. Okay? So that made us feel a little bit better about the new Gen Ed, which we had before the competency, before the TAP Gen Ed, we had a Gen Ed that was organized around divisions. And it was very much a turf-based Gen Ed. Okay, this department gets this course, these department gets this course, and so it wasn't around what skills and what abilities we wanted our students to be able to do. And NIAS came in and said, you can't do that, and so that's why we went in the direct. We actually created our own competency-based Gen Ed, and then we heard the TAP was coming, and we said, well, screw this, we'll just take the TAP. And so I matched it up so that they could see that we were on the right track with this. The other thing that was interesting is that because the multi-state collaborative was something that that was being assessed outside of our state, in other words, my faculty weren't doing the assessment, so it was no huge time commitment for them. What they had to do was design an assignment. Most of them already had the assignment designed. It was already there because I said to them, I said, here's a rubric. Do you have an assignment that does this? If you don't worry about it. I won't use you. I'm not going to make you do any extra work. I said, but if you have an assignment that matches this, I'd love to use you in this study. And so the only work they had to do was check to see if their assignment matched the rubric, and then they had to take and upload documents into a Blackboard folder that I created for them. Okay? So that's all they had to do. Now, I know that you guys, your faculty did a lot more than that, but I didn't require a lot of that for my faculty because they were already ticked off at me about the TAP. Okay? So that's what I required them to do. And what we found was that there were faculty volunteering to do this in written communication and in quantitative reasoning, okay, in areas, in disciplines where they hadn't applied to become part of the TAP. So, in other words, they were telling me by saying that they had an assignment that works here and that they could upload student work, they were saying that they had courses that they were teaching that fit written communication for our Gen Ed and fit quantitative literacy for our Gen Ed, and yet they never applied to have their course approved for the Gen Ed. Okay? So now I'm saying, hey, you've got an opportunity here. Your course could go into the Gen Ed. I mean, you've shown us through participating in multi-state collaborative that your course could qualify for Gen Ed. So why not do it? I mean, it's going to create more of a market for your course, and it's going to create more flexibility for your students. And so by matching it up that way, I'm sort of creating avenues and opportunities for my faculty. Let's see. The other thing that I noticed, and I want to point out that part of my job as associate dean is overseeing the library director, and we have our my two librarians are here. That's Jamie and Jenna. Okay, they did a beautiful presentation this morning. So one of the things that I do is oversee the library, and what I noticed in the national data, in the state data, and in our local data under written communication is that the weakest area, one of the weakest areas, there were two. One was disciplinary and convention and genre conventions. Okay, that was a weak area. And then the other area was sources and evidence. Okay, now genre and convention, I'm guessing a lot of that has to do with citation. Okay, both areas, so source and evidence, citation, That's all information literacy and library type of stuff. And so, and I know that my library has been doing an awesome job working with students and working with first year and working with faculty who are willing to work with them. But not all faculty have been all that receptive. And so now I use the data and I say, look, students nationally, statewide, and at our institution are struggling in these areas. It would be really great if you faculty would work with the library because they are incredible experts in these areas and can help you design assignments, can help you assess students, can help you in all kinds of different areas. And so that's sort of where I'm using the multi-state as a selling point in that. And that leads me, I think I still have like 2 minutes left, right? They told me to go last because I would use up all the time if I didn't. So I'm hoping I'm not. I'm going to pass out, this is the TAP rubric for continuing learning and information literacy. I didn't put it in the packet because I didn't know if I'd have time for it. Is it in there? Oh, that's weird. Okay. The information literacy one is? Yeah, I didn't. That's in there? Okay. Here, I'll pass it out just in case people don't have it. Okay. There you go. There you go. There you go. Oops. There you go. And then I also want to give you, okay, the AAC and U information literacy rubric. Okay? What you're going to see is that there are similarities between the AAC and U and the TAP, just like with the others. Okay? And our librarians throughout the system created the TAP version. Our librarians got together in 2012, the summer of 2012, the system-wide librarians, and they came up with the TAP one. And the AAC and U one is the national. Now, there are a lot of similarities, but here comes the twist. Okay? This past year, the ACRL, which, Jamie, you can tell me what that stands for. Yeah. Association of College and Research Libraries. Okay, they came up with what they call frames, which are basically competencies and outcomes, new competencies and outcomes for students in library science information literacy. Okay, now that leads to the question and the idea that rubrics and this whole assessment business that we're in is a living thing. Okay, and I know the FERC, and Joe, are you still FERC? Oh, you are. You're FERC. Yes, you're FERC. FERC right now is debating on how to change rubrics and how to change competencies and outcomes because we have our first test right here. Yes. Okay, and so we have our first test here. The librarians are always trying to push the envelope, of course, right? And so you'll see that these knowledge practices these practices that they have here basically are competencies and outcomes, but they're completely different than what you find on the AAC and U rubric and completely different than what you see on our TAP. Okay? So thank you. So now, best practices are that we should be assessing students on these, not on what the TAP says and not on what the AAC and U says. Okay? But based upon what this the National Library Organization is saying. So, where do we go from here, Lauren? I don't know. It's right because now
get assessment data.
Now we have to get assessment data, and we're going to have to. So again, the reason I bring this up is because we need to figure out how to approach this because faculty are now getting a rubric for the first time and saying assess this, and the information that we're asking them to assess is already out of date. Okay, and that's how assessment works. Assessment not only tells you how students are performing, but it also tells you where your tools, your assessment tools fall short. In fact, one of the things I learned as being a scorer for the Multi-State Collaborative, because I was trained to be a scorer for the Multi-State Collaborative. I didn't score anybody from Connecticut. They gave me all out-of-state people. But one of the things I noticed is I was a written communication scorer, and everyone uploaded the assignments too. So I would open the assignment, then I'd look at the student paper, and I would say probably 75% of the assignments were terrible, unclear, vague. You could not tell what the student was really being asked to do. And so therefore, right, the data that comes out of that is a problem. Because really, the data isn't demonstrating that the student can't do the work. The data is saying that the instrument that the prompt that the student got wasn't sufficient for the student to be able to respond in the appropriate way. So one of the things we need to work on as an institution and as a system is I'd say professional development in assignment construction around outcomes.
I would
Yeah.
agree with what Ron just said, because the two groups of faculty that participated in our two assessment retreats, at the end of the day, or at the end of the second day, said, I know how to correct my assignment now. You know, I see the shortcomings in my own assignments, because, you know, these students were supposedly asked to do X, Y, and Z, and yet they've not. And thinking back through their own assignment, they realized where they had made, you know, where they could make the instructions a little clearer.
Right. And so if your assessment tool is unclear, then you're not really measuring student ability. What you're measuring is how poorly constructed your assignment is.
And I think that's a problem, not just in the multi-state collaborative, but a problem in every assessment activity.
And so those are some of the things I learned in this project. But thank you.
I mentioned earlier that we had to come collaborative among ourselves. And one of the things that we've done is to look at the issue of the assessment of learning outcomes outside of the multi-state collaborative. We were sponsoring a conference May 6th that we're doing with assessment, and we're bringing in NIAS to talk about their new standards. And we're thinking about a follow-up to the May conference on the science design that might happen in the fall. At this point, we'll entertain any questions that you may have or comments. Yes?
I may not have misunderstood some of this, but when you were gathering assignments for assessment, such as at the 90 credit and the 45 credit, and it was math or funded, someone said something, well, the student with 90 credits may not have taken math recently. Where did that assignment come from, if not from a course that an instructor gave in the current time frame?
That's a good question, yeah.
Well, chemistry courses.
Right.
And, you know,
So
things,
it wasn't necessarily
a math course, no.
Right.
Actually, none of our assignments came from math courses.
And we've-
maybe I'm not framing the question right. So all the assignments submitted were current assignments that students,
Right.
not reaching back, or asking them to do an assignment for the study, see where
Right,
they were.
right.
So we don't know what that student who took science or math at the community college or at the 100, 200 level, where they are.
So, for example, one of my
Not that they all
classes,
need to know. Yeah, I mean, I just, it just was a question.
one of my classes, so I had one class that was engineering. I had another class that asked a statistical problem. I had another class that was from economics, and that one actually happened to be a sophomore level class, but it had enough seniors to participate. What I am wondering, and I think I have enough data after the two retreats to actually check this, is that the complexity of the engineering problem is such that it's difficult from somebody from a different discipline to actually assess that
Yeah, that may be it.
question.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think is actually going on.
Yeah.
Because,
So, but I'm wondering, so it's competency and skills, right? So it's not, the content comes in some
I don't know the answer
For
to it.
literature, or reading, and writing, it could be a range of writing courses or
What-
courses that require writing.
One of AACNU's goals with this project is to prove that these are universal rubrics, and I think the information we have on critical thinking and written communication, I think those two are fairly universal. I think that the quantitative rubric can be used universally, but I think that the person assessing it has to be more discipline specific. So
Yeah.
I think that you have to have someone who's familiar with statistics, analyzing the artifacts that come out of the stats, the stats program.
You know, what's interesting about it, I just want to, you talk about critical thinking being one that's more universal, yet when you look at the distribution, it's more kind of diverse, like you look at
Yes.
quantitative and you can see that most people are, given the
And-
same score, but you see a very different distribution.
Right, and what I don't know how to analyze at this point is how do you say how closely this assignment is aligned with that rubric?
Right.
And so do you, at some point, you just have to go on good faith. The faculty member says that it's aligned well. You have your workshops that, were faculty trade assignments, and they think that the instructions are clear. Some of our faculty, they give, a brief overview of the instructions, but a lot of the instructions were verbal. So they're not always captured in,
Right.
huh?
Our courses are all online. They can be equally confusing though.
Yeah.
How they're
And so,
written.
but some of that, I can't get there's no way for me to quantify how closely an assignment aligns with the rubric.
But I think that makes the assessment real. In the ideal situation,
That's true.
these things would all be nicely lined up and everyone would be following it step by step. But we're assessing teaching and learning as it happens in classrooms. And we could learn from this particular areas that we want to devote time and energy in terms of professional development or faculty development. But it is measuring what's really happening, and that we have in our classes, that we have rubrics, and maybe we haven't spent enough time. I know we also did, professional development at Southern, but we really need to think through, and not only campus by campus, but as a system. If we feel that a competency-based approach makes sense, if we feel that these global competencies, such as written communication and critical thinking, are worth measuring and are worthwhile to use as tools for evaluating gen ed, then we need to think through all these issues and not just the assessment part of it. Yeah.
If you were assessing just one particular assignment, that assignment might not be meant to get all of the outcomes from that rubric, right? You might have a number of different
Right.
assignments. I would say.
And that's why they completed a cover sheet or a checklist to say a calculation wasn't included in the quantitative. So there's,
How,
But I
yeah,
also,
but they had no NAs for score. Score couldn't score NA. They had 0 through 4, I
Yeah.
think,
0
0 through 4. So you couldn't, so if it wasn't there, you were getting a 0, which would affect your average, and yeah. But at the same time, your individual IR department could pull, they could pull all the zeros and determine which of those had forms filled out saying that wasn't applicable.
But so to really assess my course, you'd have to take a number of different assignments, see which outcomes.
Right.
we're not assessing the course.
Right.
We're assessing whether or not the student can think critically or.
Right.
and that can come from different courses. And that's why we're looking at students who are near completion to graduation, because in many ways it is a sum of all the courses and experiences that the students had. If they're able to engage in critical thinking at an accelerated level, that reflects the contributions of many different courses
And-
that
and
they've taken.
The other thing is that the way that we were, one of the restrictions that the multi-state, that the initiative placed on us was that we couldn't remove, so in my case, we couldn't say, okay, here's our transfer students, here's our native students. So in Ron's case, he can't say, this student is taking, has only taken 3 hours at my school. I can't exclude them from this. So this is generic population across the board, but I think the model is effective. It can be used. It's, some of the artifacts are collected 3 weeks into the semester. Others are capstone projects. So it is, you can't think of this as you're assessing a course. You're assessing what the student knows.
Isn't it a concern that it's not a random sample of students with 45 or 90 versus here are these particular faculty and these students ended up in this particular?
Every campus has to submit a sampling plan that is evaluated by a national committee that was established for that specific purpose. And you can't proceed with the project unless you've gone through that process.
It is possible that, I could have had a faculty member who said, I've got 50 students in my class, I'm going to give you 10. But I asked for all the artifacts.
As did I.
So there was, for me, there was no cherry picking. I asked for all the artifacts, give me all your artifacts. In a handful of cases, there were 1 or 2 students who just didn't submit. And I know that because they gave me access to Blackboard to go in and harvest the artifacts. And the student just never submitted that assignment. And then, so in my first assessment retreat, we scored only those artifacts that were submitted to the multi-state. And in my second assessment retreat, which was in January, we scored the remainder of those artifacts. So I can honestly say on my campus, no cherry picking.
I could tell you, once I had a list of faculty, I randomly gave them the names and ID numbers for the students that I wanted. I just randomly picked them off of a list that my IR department, so they didn't get to pick the students. I picked the students. And I just did it random. I had no idea who these students were. I just randomly said, send me assignments from these 10 people, if they had 10, or less if they didn't have 10 in their class. However, because at the community college level, the graduation rates and the retention rates are so, need to be much better. When you get to students with 45 credits, it becomes very, very difficult to get a representative sample without getting faculty members who might only have 1 student in that class or 2 students in that class, or and I wasn't willing to put faculty through this process to get 1 student from them for that.
Right.
But like Yvonne's,
It worth their while.
yeah, it had to be worth their while. And so for me, once we had our collection and we got our data, I asked my IR department to run a report to determine whether or not our sample was representative. And it came back that I think it was representative by gender, but nothing else. It wasn't representative by race or age or anything else like that. It was only represented by gender. And so it was, so it wasn't helpful to use that population to generalize about the college as a whole. All we knew was that, we were able to do a collection. And we'd have to think about, how will we go about getting a representative sample, because what we're currently doing is not representative. But the way I viewed this process, was a way to educate my faculty about assessment, because until recently, the only assessment that's been going on has been in English, math, and accredited programs. So nobody else has been doing assessment. They don't even know what it is. And so this has been a process of educating my faculty about what assessment is in a sort of low-stakes sort of way for us. And so for me, the data wasn't as important as the process that the faculty went through, and to see the results. And they got all excited about the results, even though it's not representative, but they're still happy about it. They're still excited about it, so.
I can easily
Anyway.
see how an institution can cherry pick though, to make it.
Yeah.
When we came up at Gateway with courses that would be designated, for example, for social phenomena, the courses that are vetted for that, and every course that's designated or vetted for social phenomena had to have written communication embedded and information literacy embedded. So we really haven't had a culture of assessment at Gateway, and we're working on it, except in accredited programs. We thought, all right, we'll need to take a random sample of every single course that is designated for social phenomena and look for those competencies to evaluate, like, the social phenomena courses, not necessarily are all this, I don't know what you said before, but you're not evaluating the course, you're evaluating.
You're evaluating what the student knows.
Yeah.
No,
We felt like
not
we needed to evaluate the course.
Demonstrate.
It's
Right.
competency.
Right.
And not just,
Right.
it's not, we couldn't use math courses because they tend to have tests, okay? And these papers, you're looking at the competencies. Now, the question is, where are the students supposed to develop these competencies? If we want students to have competency in historical thinking, for example, where may we find the precursors of that? Which of our courses would contribute to the development of that competency? And it's a different way of looking at the courses.
I think for our campus, it's been helpful to explain that, you know, what major doesn't teach or stress critical thinking.
Right.
And, you know, but yet when you are assessing the student in that course, it's not just that course that's contributing to that student's abilities. It's their entire academic career.
In fact, as important it is to all of us because we are disciplinary based and we're disciplinary trained, you know, the result, the purpose of having general education and the purpose of having these well-rounded students is because problems aren't disciplinary specific necessarily. And if we want to have citizens who can solve problems and are critical thinkers and can go out and be flexible, because the job market changes all the time and they need to be flexible to go from one career to another career to another career, we need to start thinking about what we are doing as educators in terms of, more and more in terms of competencies rather than disciplines. Because disciplines sort of, the disciplinary model allows students to say, I took that history course, check that off the box, never have to think about history ever again as long as I live. Took my 2 English courses, never have to think about writing as long as I live, right? Took the 2 math courses, never have to think about math as long as I live, right? And the more we think interdisciplinarily, and the more we think in terms of competencies which require us to think interdisciplinarily, the more students will recognize that all of these things are everywhere and that they need that knowledge from everywhere in order to solve the problems that they're going to be exposed to in the workplace, you know, or wherever they're going, graduate school, wherever, you know. So that's just my little soapbox that I like to get on.
Okay, so on that note,
Were you advertising permit? This has been a real good session. I wouldn't like to see it get lost. So I want to suggest to the presenters that we consider submitting something like this to the fall forum of the New England Educational Assessment Network. I say that as a long-term president of that organization and in fact a long-term past president now. The fall forum is a place where something like this would be, we have 300 people.
Yeah.
And I think that would make a difference in terms of what you want to present. It's always the first Friday in November. You just go on the DN website and find all the details. And we just say thank you.
Oh, thank you. We love Deanne.